So much on my mind, keep it all in line, juggling tasks that fall from the sky. Oh, what a scene, somewhere on this road, there is a load that's lighter for me. Show me the road that's lighter for me.
Welcome to episode 9 of the parenting TV series Chaos to Calm. In this series, we look at those all too familiar family chaos moments and see how we can transform them to calm. I'm your host, Noelle Kirchner. I'm a minister and writer who has published in places like the Huffington Post, the Today Show Parenting Team, and Crosswalk.com. I'm also a mom of 2 boys, soon to be 3 boys. In honor of my family's news, I wanted to hone in on issues that are vital to boys' development today, and I knew just the guest to help me do it. Dr. Leonard Sax is the New York Times best-selling author of The Collapse of Parenting. I am grateful to have him as a repeat guest on the show, this time for an extended episode. We will be focusing on his book, Boys Adrift, the 5 factors driving the growing epidemic of unmotivated boys and underachieving young men. Originally published in 2007, Boys Adrift has been recently updated with new material and remains a seminal book in the field of parenting. So, let's get started. Welcome, Dr. Sacks. It's great to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me back.
So shortly before we were on air, you told me that Boys Adrift, even though it's not a New York Times bestseller, is by far and away your most popular book to date.
That's right. It's outselling all the others by a wide margin.
That's just wonderful. So we're just delighted to unpack some of the insights and your advice today for the benefit of everyone watching, particularly those who have boys or who know someone who has a boy or who simply are just concerned about what they may be witnessing in society today as it relates to growing boys in our area, and for that matter, around the world. You cite several examples of boys' performance and motivation lagging behind girls in many modern schools today. Can you tell our audience about the 4 changes in education that you believe are influencing this outcome?
Okay, well, I always like to begin that conversation by just briefly reviewing the data, because many people get uneasy when you say boys are falling behind, and they'll say, look, 50 years ago, more than 90% of Fortune 500 CEOs were men. Today, more than 90% of Fortune 500 CEOs are men. So who cares? I mean, so maybe boys are not doing as well in school. Men still control the great majority of the wealth in the world. They still are greatly overrepresented among the political leaders of the world. And that's true. But we do need to be concerned. Again, a big chunk of Boys Adrift is devoted to presenting the evidence and then trying to understand it. When you look at who's graduating from university, there's a growing gender gap. Comparing sisters and brothers in the same demographic, any demographic you look at in the United States, certainly among white, black, and Latino, this is less true for Asian Americans, but for white, black, and Latino and Spanish-speaking Americans, there's a growing gender gap, with the boy now much less likely to graduate from a 4-year college compared to his sister among white, black, and Spanish-speaking families. Less likely to earn a graduate degree, doing less well in school, K through 12, much more likely to drop out of school, at high school, much more likely to have a discipline referral, less likely to take advanced placement courses compared to his sister, less likely to take multiple advanced placement courses. Again, we now got lots of data. When I first wrote the book, the first edition, we didn't have so much data. And that's one reason the publisher asked me to write a revised edition, is because there's been this avalanche of new research showing
Proof
this
about the lagging.
Gender gap is growing. And when the first edition came out in 2007, there were serious people who questioned whether this was really a thing, this gender gap in academic achievement. There's very few serious people who questioned that reality anymore who have looked at the data. You'll still find blog posters who haven't studied this, who will say, well, male and female aren't really a thing. But when you look at the data, you say, well, they kind of are, because when you break the data down by male and female, you find huge differences now in the white, black, and Spanish-speaking communities. So now to get to your question, what accounts for that? Well, again, the subtitle of the book references 5 factors. You're mentioning one of those 5, which is changes in education. And that one factor, how has education changed? You know, I attended public schools K through 12 growing up in Northern Ohio. And I remember our honors assembly 40 some years ago in high school. The winner of the prize for writing was Andy Borowitz, who was also editor of the school newspaper. He's gone on to have a great career. He writes a humor column for the New Yorker called the Borowitz Report. He was a year ahead of me. The editor of the Poetry Journal was a boy. The great majority of the kids on the stage earning honors were boys. Well, you go back to my high school, they still have an honors assembly. The great majority of the kids earning honors now are girls. And that's not unique to my high school. That's very common now across the United States, that girls are greatly overrepresented among those graduating with highest honors at high school. Now look, the fact that girls have made gains is wonderful. That's not a problem. That's cause for celebration.
Absolutely.
The question is, why didn't we level off at 50-50? Why do we have a growing gender gap with the boys falling farther and farther behind their sisters? That's the question I try to answer. And one of the 5 factors are changes in education. So now finally I'm going to answer your question. How did education change over the past 30 years that had the unintended consequence of disengaging many boys, especially black, white, and Latino boys, from academic excellence? Well, it changed in 4 ways. One was the acceleration of the early elementary curriculum. 30 years ago, in kindergarten in the United States, kids were playing duck, duck, goose and singing in rounds. In the United States, 35 years ago, kids learned to read and write in 1st grade at 6 years of age. Today, in most kindergartens in the United States, kids are expected to learn to read and write in kindergarten at 5 years of age. We now ask 5-year-olds to do what we used to ask 6-year-olds to do. And that acceleration of the early elementary curriculum really took place in the United States in the 1990s. I wrote a paper for the American Psychological Association back in 2001 titled Reclaiming Kindergarten, Making Kindergarten Less Harmful to Boys. And I wrote that paper in 2001 documenting how kindergarten had become 1st grade and how that acceleration of the early elementary curriculum was really harmful to boys. We now know, we now have lots of good brain research looking at MRI scans of children that age, and we can see that the language area in the 5-year-old boy looks very much like the language area in a 3.5-year-old girl. It's not developmentally appropriate to ask a 3.5-year-old girl to learn and sit and learn about diphthongs and digraphs. And it is not developmentally appropriate for most 5-year-old boys. And if you ask 5-year-old boys to do things that are not developmentally appropriate, what happens is that those 5-year-old boys develop a negative attitude towards school. I hate school. I'd rather go home and play video games. And researchers led by Deborah Stipek, Dean of Education at Stanford, have found that once kids form those negative attitudes towards school, which are pretty well formed by the end of the kindergarten year, those attitudes once formed are global, stable, and non-contingent. Global means that kid knows he's not doing well in phonics, he thinks he's dumb in everything. Stable means you track the kid down years down the road, he has the same beliefs. And non-contingent, he doesn't think there's anything he can do or anything you can do that's going to make any difference. So the early years are immensely important, and we're not doing them right.
Wow.
That's one change. And in support of that claim, I look at Finland. So Finland routinely outscores the United States by a wide margin on measures of academic achievement at 16 years of age. So that's the Program for International Student Assessment, the PISA. What's so special about Finland? American researchers have studied this at great length. We spend more money per capita on education than they do in Finland. And yet, at age 16, kids in Finland have better reading comprehension, better writing skills, better math skills by Americans, and by a wide margin. Well, there's a couple answers to that question, but one of the things that's special about Finland is they don't start until age 7.
I remember reading that and being shocked because that's so different than what you see today. Even with our pre-K programs, it seems like we try to start fast-tracking that kindergarten year, even advance of kindergarten itself.
If you tried to open an American kindergarten in Finland, enrolling 5-year-olds to sit in a classroom and learn to read and write, they'd arrest you. You would be committing a federal crime.
Wow.
Well, we have a 2-year head start. And again, I mentioned I have a problem with this program called Head Start. I'm not picking on the program, I'm picking on the name. In the United States, there's a program called Head Start. Enroll your kid in Head Start, which implies that education is a race. And if you get a head start, you have an advantage. Well, it turns out that's just not accurate. Education is not a race. Why would starting 2 years later give kids in Finland an advantage? If you wait until a child is 7 years old to teach that child to learn to read and write, every child who doesn't have a major learning difference is ready. The key to success in early education is to do the right thing at the right time. If you start 2 years early, you end up with a lot of boys who think they're dumb, they hate school, and those beliefs, once formed, are stable. If you wait till age 7, it's the right time, and you don't have all these boys with negative, hostile attitudes towards school. So that's one of the 4 ways that education changed.
And that's a solution that you offer to parents. Parents who hear this and are concerned, what's one thing that they can do? Well, they can wait until their son is 6 to sign them up for kindergarten to give them that edge in age so that it is more developmentally appropriate what they're asked to do.
And we're not far from Manhattan. The Upper East Side of Manhattan is an affluent neighborhood where the New York Times looked at kids attending kindergarten, private kindergarten on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, found that more than half had turned 6 years of age before they began kindergarten, and a significant number were 7. So affluent parents, many of them have figured this out, that your child is at an advantage if they're the older child in the classroom. If they're the youngest child in the classroom, they're at a real disadvantage. So affluent parents on the Upper East Side have figured this out. Creates a great challenge for the teacher because she's got 7-year-olds and 5-year-olds in the same classroom. And that's a real challenge. Now, there are schools like Montessori schools that specialize in mixed age, but most American kindergartens do not specialize in mixed age. They expect every kid to accomplish the same landmark at the same time, and the youngest kid in the classroom is going to struggle, is going to realize they're struggling, and is very likely to form that belief, I'm dumb. And you don't want your child to have that belief. So I'll counsel parents. I'll say, hey, your child has an August birthday. You don't want your child to be the youngest child in the classroom. And the parent will be offended. Some parents will say, are you saying I need to hold my child back? And I say, I didn't say that. I'm saying you need to give your child the gift of an extra year of childhood. I never use the phrase hold your child back because that implies retarded, behind. It has lots of negative connotations for Americans. I say give your child the gift of an extra year of childhood because I explain kindergarten isn't kindergarten. It's not at all what Friedrich Froebel, the inventor of kindergarten, had in mind 160 years ago.
It's different.
It is first grade. Kindergarten has become first grade. It's not kindergarten anymore. It's not singing in rounds and playing duck, duck, goose. It's phonics. It's diphthongs. It's arithmetic. And it's first grade. The kindergarten curriculum today is the first grade curriculum of 30 years ago. And if they're going to ask your kid to sit still, be quiet, and learn about diphthongs, your child should be 6 years of age.
I want to make sure that we get to another important change in education that really resonated with me because having 2 sons, I see particularly my younger son is so interested in hands-on learning. And you make a delineation between 2 different kinds of knowledge in your book, and they're German words, so I'm going to let you pronounce them. But I'd like you to say a little bit about the changes in education as it relates to both of those kinds of learning.
So in most European languages, there are 2 words for our English verb to know. In German, you have wissen and kennen. In French, you have savoir and connaître. In Spanish, you have conocer and saber. In each of those languages, there's a distinction between experiential knowledge. I know you, ich kenne dich. You and I have met each other, kennenzulernen. I've gotten to know you. I know chemistry. Ich habe über Chemie Wissenschaft. I have book learning about chemistry. In English, to express that distinction between experiential learning and book learning, we have to add on words like experiential and book learning. In these other languages, it's intrinsic in the word. Kenntnis means experiential, hands-on learning. Wissenschaft is book learning. And education should be an age-appropriate balance of both. In the early years, the balance should be heavily weighted in favor of Kenntnis, experiential learning, hands-on learning. And I talk about what I've observed firsthand in visiting German and Swiss schools and their emphasis on experiential learning. In the German Wald kindergarten, there's no classroom. The kids are outdoors all day long, all year round. And Americans will say, what do you mean there's no classroom? What about when it snows? What about when it's really cold? Bavaria, the Alps, it gets really cold there. And the Germans say, es gibt kein schlechtes Wetter, nur ungeeignete Kleidung, which means there's no such thing as bad weather, just unsuitable clothes. And I have great photos of the kids rolling in the snow and building snow forts and cooking their lunch over an open fire in the snow. And the kids love snow. We don't like it because we have to drive in it, but kids love snow. So experiential learning is what young children need, both girls and boys. And over the last 30 years, there's been a well-documented change in American education away from experiential learning towards didactic instruction. So a very concrete example. 35 years ago, it was much more common for American kids at 5 years of age to get in the bus and go on a field trip to the park where they'd splash in a pond to chase after a tadpole. That is much less common today. Today, it's much more likely that those 5-year-olds are going to be sitting in a classroom looking at a video about how tadpoles become frogs. That's didactic instruction. And we have good research showing that if that boy at 5 years of age had the experience of splashing in a pond to chase after a tadpole, you follow that boy 3 years down the road, he's much more likely to be interested in how tadpoles actually become frogs. If he's never had that experience of splashing in a pond to chase after a tadpole, and I meet with young kids all the time. I just met with first graders at Ripawam-Siskwa School in Mount Kisco 2 weeks ago, and I'll meet with the kids and I'll ask them, who has splashed in a pond to chase after a tadpole? It is now common to find American kids at first grade, at fourth grade, who have never in their life touched a tadpole or frog. If they haven't had that experiential learning, they're much less likely to be engaged in the content. Why did that change happen? Liability and cost. Turns out it's a lot cheaper to have kids sit in a classroom, look at a video, than to put them in a bus and go to the pond. Put them in a bus and go to the pond, that's a lot more expensive, and it increases your liability insurance.
You also talk about how computers have really made that transition that's happening in schools the case, because there's this emphasis on the book learning, there's this emphasis on screens. You mentioned the video in your example, but also just computer-based learning versus going out and having those tactile experiences, the field trips that take more work, have more liability, which is a big concern because, like I said, as I see how my particularly younger son learns, there's a gap that wouldn't be addressed with that transition.
Yeah. So in my book, The Collapse of Parenting, I devote a chapter to comparing American education and outcomes of American education with other countries. So for example, back in 2000, we were doing still pretty well on the international comparisons, on the PISA, for example, and Poland was down here. America was way ahead of Poland in 2000. Between 2000 and 2015, we switched places with Poland. Poland is now far above us on the international comparisons. And we are now way, way down with Latvia and Slovenia. And Poland, as I said, is way above us. We still outspend Poland by outspend Poland per capita on education by a factor of 3. We spend 3 times as much money per capita on education as Poland does. And yet we have slid dramatically No other nation has ever seen its rankings collapse on the international comparisons
Wow.
the way the United States has over the past 15 years. Why did that happen? So I cite a number of scholars, but one of my favorite writers on this topic is Amanda Ripley, who wrote a book called The Smartest Kids in the World. I'm old enough to remember when American kids were the smartest kids in the world. 40 years ago, American kids routinely were number one on all the international comparisons. And then in the early 80s, we got the first reports that Japanese kids had moved ahead. And this was a big deal. This was almost like a Sputnik moment for the United States. And the Reagan administration impaneled a commission to investigate. And they published a report called A Nation at Risk, 1983, saying this is a matter of national security that American kids are no longer number one. Well, we're number 32 today, and we are far behind Poland, to say nothing of the leaders like Finland. So Amanda Ripley, her book, The Smartest Kids in the World, referencing the fact that American kids are no longer the smartest kids in the world, kids in Poland are now much higher. Why is that, she asked. The United States adopted screens in the classroom between 2000 and 2015 in a way which has no analog anywhere else on the planet. Public schools and private schools spent literally billions of dollars looking across the United States as a whole to put screens in the classroom, with no evidence that putting screens in the elementary school classroom was of any educational benefit. We now have a great deal of research that putting a 5-year-old in front of an iPad is a disaster in terms of that child acquiring social skills, acquiring listening skills. It's not best practice. It's the very opposite. But American schools have done this in part because American parents love technology. And an American parent is choosing a private kindergarten. And I've counseled many schools and kindergartens on this. I just did a keynote for the Cincinnati Montessori Society on this topic. So a parent is choosing a private preschool or kindergarten for her 4-year-old or 5-year-old. And this kindergarten is a one-to-one iPad school where the kids are learning Spanish on an iPad. And this kindergarten over here is play-based, where the kids are rolling in the dirt and making a fort out of mud. And many parents say, look, if I'm going to spend thousands of dollars a year on kindergarten, I want my kid to go to the one-to-one iPad school. And I said to the educators last week in Cincinnati, I said, you got to educate parents that 5-year-olds don't need iPads. They need to get their hands dirty. They need to be outdoors. That's what the research shows. This is not a guess. We've got a great deal of research on this. The United States, uniquely among all countries on the planet, has put screens in the early elementary classroom to the great detriment of American kids.
So going on to a third change in education, you talk about a lack of competition existing in the schools and how perhaps a concern for self-esteem initially implemented, that or instigated that pullback. But how self-esteem is more an issue for girls than for boys, and boys, in fact, need that competition to be motivated. So what you're having are these unmotivated boys when competition isn't existing in the classroom like it maybe is existing in athletics. Can you flesh that out a little bit more so parents know what they should be looking for?
Today everybody gets a trophy, but the problem is that for many boys, if everybody gets a trophy, then the trophy ain't worth anything. So a mother of a second grader told me how at her son's school, the PE instructor announced that a week from Friday there's going to be a race. They're going to race 4 times around the oval. Well, this boy took that very seriously and started training. Every recess and every lunch, he was running around the oval. And so the big day comes, and all 35 second graders line up, and the instructor says, on your mark, get set, go. And this boy ran as hard as he could. And he came in second out of 35. And he was very proud of that until the teacher gave everyone a first place ribbon, including the kid who had walked around the oval once and stopped. Everyone got a first place ribbon. And the second grade boy came home in tears of anger. He said to his mom, teacher tricked us. He said it was going to be a race. Teacher tricked us. He said, I'm never going to run a race again. But I emphasize, individual competition is not best practice, because individual competition motivates only if boys think they can win. And if you say to your 4th graders, okay, let's have a spelling bee, your 4th grade boy is going to say, I don't care about spelling, girls are going to win. I was at a middle school and they had posted the honor roll, the principal's honor roll, the kids with the highest grade point average in the school. There were 22 names, 19 girls and 3 boys. So I met with the kids in an assembly. I said, okay, this next question, I just want the boys to answer. Gentlemen, in the hallway, I see there's the principal's honor roll with 19 girls and 3 boys. I just want the boys to raise your hand if you can answer this next question. Gentlemen, why are there only 3 boys out of 22 students on the principal's honor roll? And a few boys raised their hand, and I called on them. And they each gave some variation on girls are smarter. And they're not kidding. They absolutely believe it. They have grown up in the world of girls rule, boys drool, and they've grown up observing that the girls greatly outperform the boys at school. They believe that girls are smarter. To me, every time I hear that, and I hear it pretty often, it still comes as a shock, because I grew up in a very different era when there were serious people wondering, are girls as smart as boys? Because look, the boys outperformed the girls by a wide margin. In the United States in the 1970s, boys were outperforming girls by a wide margin on many academic parameters. They were overrepresented among those graduating with highest honors. Today, girls are overrepresented among those graduating with highest honors by a wide margin. So many boys think girls are smarter. So if you just have an individual spelling bee, that's not going to work to motivate your son. You have to have a team competitive format where half the kids are on Alpha team, the other half are on Charlie team, and every kid's going to be required to stand and spell one of these 200 words. And that will motivate if it's done right. And there's more to say about how to implement the team competitive format. You have to start with an athletic competition to get the boys to buy in. And I'm very specific about what the athletic competition needs to be as well. Tug of war is great for 4th grade boys, girls against boys, because boys, we live in a sexist culture. And that begins with Nick Jr. and the Disney Channel. And both boys and girls think that boys are stronger than girls. And so you say, okay, 5th graders, let's have boys against girls, tug of war. Both the boys and the girls expect the boys to win. They don't know that the average 5th grade girl is bigger and stronger than the average 5th grade boy, because many of the girls have begun the process of puberty. Very few of the boys have. And the girls will beat the boys every time in tug of war. So you have girls against boys, tug of war, and the boys lose. Girls against boys, obstacle course, which is a series of balance beams. The boys will lose. And the boys are now really upset. And you say, okay, next week, spelling bee, girls against boys. Every one of you will be called on to spell one of these 200 words. Now, at this point, this boy knows that his contribution may be decisive in whether or not his team wins. And boys want to beat girls, and girls get great enjoyment out of beating the boys. So that actually works. And I can give you examples of public schools and private schools that have deployed the team competitive format at the elementary school. I've got great photos to motivate the boys in spelling.
That's interesting. So for a parent who feels like their son is disengaging in school, besides thinking about holding the child back until 6 to begin kindergarten, you mentioned parents of boys, look for competitive formats like what you describe in schools. You mentioned look for schools
look for a boy-friendly school, and I explain what I mean by that. Mm-hmm. Boys doing things that boys have always done, and this is the 4th change in education over the last 30 years. Schools have become unfriendly to boys. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that boys doing things that boys have always done now gets you in trouble. So as I mentioned, I attended public schools in Ohio, K through 12. I attended Lowmont Elementary School. So this is northern Ohio, outside Cleveland. We get a lot of snow, lake effect snow. And I remember attending that school during the winter months. We put on our jackets at lunch and recess and go outside and throw snowballs at each other, and teachers would come out and join us, students against teachers. I remember Mr. Albers was a great shot, get you right between the eyes every time. Not anymore. Today, 2 kids throwing snowballs at each other, a teacher administrator runs out and says, what are you guys doing? You're not allowed to do that here. Boys pointing fingers at each other, saying, bang, bang, you're dead, now can result in a discipline referral. I was visiting an elementary school a while back, and I was waiting to meet with the principal. The receptionist had stepped away, so it was just me and 9 students in the waiting room, all boys sent down for discipline referrals, 9 little boys, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade boys. And I asked him, no adults around, it's just me talking to these kids. And I said, what do you think about school? And the boy said, I hate school. School's a stupid waste of time. I wish I could just stay home and play video games. Well, why do you say that? You know, a lot of people have written about this gender gap. So Kay Heimowitz is a scholar in Manhattan Institute, who wrote a book where she said, well, the growing gender gap, and I'm just about quoting because I've cited her book many times. She says the gender gap in academic achievement is due, she says, to the uncertainty many young men have about their role as provider in the global marketplace of the 21st century. And you'll hear a lot of, I'm not picking just on her, a lot of scholars have made this argument that, well, you know, we now live in a knowledge-based economy and women have better verbal skills and young men see that women are doing better than them at university. And 50 years ago, men were motivated because they thought they'd be the sole breadwinner. Now they can see that their sisters can earn as much money as they can or more. And that's why boys are not motivated. Young men are not motivated. No, that's not right. I'm quite certain that's not the correct explanation because I'm talking to these boys, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old boys, and I'm asking them, why do you hate school? I've never had a 6-year-old boy say to me anything like, well, I'm uncertain about what my role will be as a provider in the global marketplace of the 21st century. No, he'd never said anything like that. He said, hey, Jason and me were pointing fingers at each other and we got sent down here. The art teacher said you can draw whatever you want, and I drew a picture of a machine gun and I got sent down here. The English teacher said, write a story about whatever you want. And I wrote a story about 2 Roman gladiators chopping each other's heads off, and I got sent down here. Boys doing things that boys have always done now gets you in trouble. That's a major factor, a major part of this boys disengaging from school.
I like what you cite in your book, and I do want to move on to some other factors. So I want to start wrapping this point up, but I like how you cite in your book, you know, if throwing snowballs is a problem, pick a place at the school where boys who want to throw snowballs can, and it's okay.
Inbounds versus out of bounds.
Exactly. So that if there's a concern about liability, then we don't do it here, but we can do it there.
Yes.
And the boys who are participating, maybe their parents have to sign a waiver, but there's an outlet for them. There's a place that they can feel like they can be boys on campus. And that's one of the things that you say can make a school seem more boy-friendly, but you also say, you know, look for hands-on, knowledge-based opportunities. You give parents, I think, a wealth of information to kind of weigh in to help ascertain the school's fit for their son.
That's right, because Boys Adrift is not primarily a book of social criticism. It's a book of solutions. What is being done to fix this? You can fix this. And again, another problem I have with Kay Heimowitz and people like her who say, well, the disengagement of boys from education is an inevitable result of the global marketplace of the 21st century. If that's true, then there's no hope. But there is hope. And I give examples of schools that understand what's really happening and can put in place zero-cost solutions. So you mentioned what I observed at St. Andrews, which is a private school in Ontario. They've got a very simple solution. You want to throw snowballs, go to the football field, where there's a box of goggles at the entrance. The throwing of snowballs is allowed on the football field, but it's not allowed anywhere else. And we've implemented that solution with schools across the United States, and it doesn't cost anything. You can accommodate these differences. You can make your school friendly to boys at zero cost and without being unfriendly to girls. And that's really what I'm trying to accomplish there, is to share strategies I've observed that have worked. And you know what? In a month's time, you can change that boy's attitude. And the boy who last month said he hated school, he'd rather stay home and play video games, now is chomping at the bit to go to school, to participate in the competitions, to write the story, to draw the picture. If you understand what's happening, you can fix it at very low cost.
I like that. I want to make sure that we touch on video games, because that was another point that really resonated with me about your book. I remember a year ago, my sons were coming home asking to play Fortnite. And when I went online and started researching it, I was seeing that they are literally able to hunt their friends down and kill them with sophisticated ammunition. And that just seemed like a major warning flag to me. I know you did a recent piece for Fox News where you described Fortnite as Minecraft meets the Hunger Games. But what I think we're seeing, particularly with violent video games, is just an addictive nature to the video game itself. And I wanted to ask you, what do you see as the dangers of these kinds of highly addictive video games on the development, particularly of boys who seem more drawn to video games themselves?
Indeed. So when I speak to parents about modern video games, meaning Minecraft, Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, Assassin's Creed, I'll sometimes ask parents to raise their hands to see if they have played these games. And you'll find many parents have not, and they don't understand how powerful these games are. Because some parents, when they think about video games, they're still thinking about Pac-Man or Pong. And they don't realize this is a completely different experience. These games have been honed over many years with advanced technology and budgets of hundreds of millions of dollars. These games are an experience. And I was speaking to high school boys, and I referred to research on Call of Duty, and I mentioned Call of Duty, referred to Call of Duty as a video game. And a boy raised his hand, and very politely, he said, "Excuse me, Call of Duty is not a game." He said, "It is a lifestyle."
Wow.
You will find many boys who couldn't care less that they're getting C's in school because they are a victor in Battle Royale in Fortnite, and that greatly raises their status. And you say, look, you're getting B's and C's at school. You're not going to get into selective college. And they'll say, hey, the top guys in Fortnite are earning $100,000 a month. I don't want to go to university. I'm going to be a Fortnite champion. And parents don't know how to answer that. Parents don't even know that there are people out there right now who are earning a lot of money winning at Fortnite. They don't know how to answer their son when their son says, "That's my dream." And you always said, go for your dream. My dream is to earn $100,000 a month playing Fortnite, so I'm going for my dream. I don't care about Spanish. And the parent has no idea what to say. So again, that chapter of Boys Adrift is to provide that parent with some content, some data, so they are prepared to give an answer.
I mean, what I hear you describing about the Fortnite dream is this phenomenon that you talk about in the book where boys are actually preferring the video game world to the real world.
Yes.
Accomplishments, valuing those more, and increasingly becoming disconnected. And in effect, it has a dehumanizing effect upon them. You mentioned more aggressive thoughts, less empathy, lack of motivation, and finally, disengagement with the real world. As a minister, I think about the character implications of what you're talking about. This is very serious. I mean, the fact that this is happening is, in my opinion, a major wake-up call. So I want to also talk about how it is attached to attention deficit. How are video games feeding attention deficit?
Well, again, I always begin with the data, and we now have very good research showing that the more time a boy spends playing video games in longitudinal cohort studies, the more likely that boy is to develop symptoms of attention deficit disorder. Modern video games program a short attention span. Everything's constantly changing. And parents who have kids who've been diagnosed with ADD say, wow, he's a star in the video game world. He's really struggling at school, but he's a champion at Fortnite. And parents say, so I want to let him do more of that to build his self-esteem. And that's clearly not best practice, because you're undermining the very skills that you should be strengthening.
Wow.
You're shortening his attention span when you need to be helping him to develop more of an attention span. And again, everything in that chapter is evidence-based, and it's such a stronger chapter than it was when I wrote the first edition, because back when I was writing that in 2005, 2006, modern video games were very new, and we didn't have these long-term longitudinal cohort studies. We had more cross-sectional studies. But now we have studies where researchers have followed the same kids for 3, 4, 5 years in a community and find that the kid who's spending more time playing video games is undermining his social skills, is doing less well in school, is less patient, is less honest over time. and controlling for all the other factors. It's not family composition, it's not household income, it's not language spoken at home or race or ethnicity. It's the time he spends playing video games that is
Wow.
driving this. So you, the parent, must limit, govern, and guide. It is not reasonable to put this burden on your 12-year-old. What's he supposed to say to his friends when his friends say, hey, come on over, we're going to have a Fortnite binge on Saturday? You can't expect a 12-year-old to say, well, researchers have found that excessive play of video games may undermine social skills. No, you have to allow them to say, hey, my evil parents won't allow it. This is your job. And you know, when I speak at a church or synagogue on this topic, I will always quote, I actually quote this when I meet with the kids as well. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 23, guard your heart. Above everything else, guard your heart, because everything you do flows from it. And I explain to the kids, what I understand that to mean is your choice of how to entertain yourself, your choice of how you spend your free time is of immense importance. That boy who's spending 20 hours a week playing Fortnite is becoming a different person than the boy who's spending 20 hours a week reading a book, shooting baskets on the basketball court, daydreaming. How you spend your free time influences the kind of person you are becoming. And that's true for children and teenagers. It's immensely true. We don't have to guess. We have very good research on this point. Guard your heart, because everything you do flows from it. If your son is spending his free time playing a game where he's pretending to kill other human beings, that will change him. It's not a guess. It's very good research on this point. The American Academy of Pediatrics says no child should be, a child or teenager should be playing a game in which the objective is to kill other human beings. Fortnite is a game in which the objective is to kill other human beings. There's 99 other people on the planet. Your mission on the island, your mission is to kill everyone else and be the only one left standing. And if you do, you are the victor in battle royale, and all your friends will look up to you. That's not a healthy culture in which your son should be immersed.
I like how you talk about the implications of character, but you also make connections regarding the boys' very health. You know, there's an increased risk of obesity the more that they play the games. You talk about unhealthy risk-taking, like speeding in a car.
Let me mention that study, because that's such a fun study. And so, okay, so this is a study of teenagers, and these researchers divide video games into rule-governed and rule-breaking. So Madden NFL football is a rule-governed game. You're trying to score a touchdown. If you try to score a touchdown by going out of bounds up into the stands and come down in the end zone, you didn't score a touchdown. You went out of bounds. Game is over. Madden NFL football is a rule-governed game. Need for Speed is a rule-breaking game. So Need for Speed is a racing game. You're in a car. But if you stay on the road, you're going to lose. In order to win, you've got to go off the road, on the sidewalk, through the occupied building, demolishing the door of the building, coming out on the other side to take a shortcut, and then you will win. You have to break the usual rules of driving in order to win the game. So Need for Speed is a game that rewards rule-breaking behavior. So the way to conceptualize this study, the researchers look at boys who are all spending 20 hours a week playing video games. But this boy is spending most of his time playing rule-governed games like Madden NFL football, NBA basketball, FIFA soccer. This boy is playing rule-breaking games like Grand Theft Auto, Need for Speed. And then they look over 3 years' time, and they find that the boy who is playing the rule-breaking game is much more likely to be arrested for a moving violation, is 3 times more likely to cause a motor vehicle accident compared to the boy who's playing a rule-governed games. But when you ask the boy, do you drive any differently because you play this game? He said, no. The boy has no insight. He said, I know it's just a game. I'm not going to drive my car on the sidewalk. He has no awareness of how playing the game is changing his behavior. So again, I have very concrete guidelines for parents. I'm not advocating an abolition. Okay, your son wants to play video games, but no games where you're killing people. He can play Madden NFL football, NBA basketball, FIFA soccer. Those games don't change personality in the way that violent games do. It's not a guess or a matter of opinion. It's a robust empirical finding. 20 hours a week is too much. You're not going to be getting enough sleep. No more than 40 minutes a night on school nights, no more than an hour a day on weekends, and your minutes do not roll over. So if your boy goes 3 weeks without playing video games, that doesn't mean he's allowed to spend 6 hours on a video game binge. That's
Yes.
binge gaming, and that's harmful. So again, the focus of the book is on concrete, evidence-based strategies that parents can use that cost nothing to improve the odds for your son.
So all video games are not created equal, is what I hear you saying.
Yes.
But I'm also wondering, what do you say to the parent who says, listen, my son is a good kid, and I just don't want him to be the only one who's not playing this game, because there is such a social infrastructure to these games.
Sure, yes.
And I see it with my children. It's not just that they're playing the game, they're chatting with their friends, they're doing different things to connect. The parents don't want their children to be isolated. What do you say to a parent who tells you that concern?
Okay, I often begin with a story from Meg Meeker. I'm a big fan of Dr. Meeker. Like me, she's a primary care physician. She's a pediatrician in Traverse City, Michigan. Like me, she writes books for parents. And we were both on the Today Show together. The Today Show episode wasn't anything special, but we were in the green room for more than an hour and a half. And so I got to talk with her. And she has 4 kids, 3 daughters, and her youngest, Walter, her son. And she knows all about this research. So when her son, Walter, was 12 years old, she said, you know what? No more video games. You're not playing video games at all. Not here, not anywhere else. I'm not going to allow you to go to a friend's house to play video games. And she told me he was furious and remained furious. He was like, are you insane? You're like the only mom in all of Michigan who doesn't let her son play video games. This is what American boys do. We play video games.
Right.
I'm going to be a total outcast. I won't even be able to talk with other people because I won't know what they're talking about. She said, too bad. So he works in part-time jobs. So she maintains this prohibition on video games. He turns 18. He says, look, I've got money I earned. I'm 18 years of age. I'm a legal adult. I'm going to go out and buy an Xbox and Call of Duty and Grand Theft Auto and Halo. And she was like, fine. So he goes off to college. And in the spring of his freshman year, towards the end of his freshman year, he calls mom and says, hey, mom, I just got $400. Guess how I got it? She says, I have no idea. He says, I sold my Xbox and all my video games. He said, Mom, you wouldn't believe there's all these guys at college who expect you to be really impressed that they can kill 8 aliens in 10 seconds in Halo. And I'm like, dude, you can't even talk to girls. The human brain is so plastic at 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 years of age. Look, I'm a medical doctor. I'm also a PhD psychologist. Over the past 35 years, one of my professional interests has been counseling addicts. And I can tell you, one of the most robust findings in addiction is the younger you are when you get addicted, the harder it is to quit. If you start smoking a pack a day when you're 25 years of age, you can give it up easy. If you start smoking a pack a day when you are 13 years of age, the odds that you will ever quit are significantly lower than the odds that a heroin addict can walk away from heroin. It's
Wow.
going to be very, very, very difficult for you to quit. And the same is true for video games. Because Meg Meeker did not allow her son to play video games, he developed other interests. And now at age 18, he can start playing video games, and after a year's time, he decides, it's not worth it. If you say, look, I'm going to limit how much time you play video games, and I'm going to limit what video games you play. Yes, your son may not be invited to the Fortnite party. You know what? That's a great thing. That's a blessing. You say, instead of going to the Fortnite party, you and me, we're going to go shoot skeet. Find real-world activities that bridge the generations. American parents, and this is a major point of my book, The Collapse of Parenting, American parents are very concerned that their kid be popular with other kids their own age. That's not your priority. Your priority is to help your child to become a conscientious adult. And one of the ways you do that is by strong bonds across generations. So you're going to go camping with other adults and other kids. You're going to find other activities, find other families that you can join for a canoe ride, a canoe trip. And I give examples of families and communities that are doing this. I've led presentations for churches. Look, instead of the youth group being a bunch of 9th graders having a pizza party, that's not what they need. The youth group should be ninth grade girls with adult women and ninth grade boys with adult men, creating bonds across generations. That's what the evidence shows. So yeah, it's entirely possible your boy may be less popular because he doesn't know the latest about how the Fortnite island has changed. That's okay. Again, in The Collapse of Parenting, I present recent research showing that the most popular kid at age 13 in the United States, being popular at age 13 is now a major risk factor for drug and alcohol use 5 years down the road.
Really?
That was not true in the United States 30 years ago. It is true today because the culture of American kids who speak English at home, who live in the United States, is a culture of disrespect. And the best way to gain status in the eyes of 13-year-olds in the culture of Akon, Eminem, 50 Cent, Bruno Mars, and Childish Gambino, who won the Grammy for Best Song a few weeks ago, is to be disrespectful to adults and to one another. That's the culture in which we now live. It's a very toxic culture for children and teenagers. And again, when I speak to parents, I talk about Bruno Mars, who got the Grammy for Best Song last year, a song titled That's What I Like that celebrates sexual harassment. He goes up to a woman he doesn't know and offers her money for sex. That's the best song of the year, 2018, in the opinion of the Recording Academy. Childish Gambino, This Is America, describes America laughing as being a culture that celebrates sex, drugs, and violence, gets a machine gun, shoots the gospel singers in a church, laughs as they crumple and die, holds up his submachine gun. That's the best song of the year, 2019. Now, of course, the critics say, that's a very enlightened comment about the mass killing in South Carolina a few years back. That's not the way 13-year-olds see it. They don't even know about that killing in South Carolina 4 years ago. They see a celebration of sex and money and violence in that song. And they see, that's the best song of the year in the opinion of the Recording Academy. It's a culture of disrespect. It's a very harmful and toxic culture. And you need to offer your child an alternative.
The peer-to-peer relationships should be underneath the child-to-parent.
Should be a lower priority
exactly,
than the parent-child relationship.
Or the child-to-mentor, like you talk about in Boys Adrift, the power of intergenerational role modeling as a boy becomes a man, and I heard you say as a girl becomes a woman, is very important. But as a parent of 2, soon to be 3 boys, I feel like it has to start at home, right?
Yes.
We have to safeguard the parent-child connection at all costs, because
you have to
then
fight for supper at home. And again, I see parents picking up their 7-year-old to take the 7-year-old to soccer practice and then to a play date, and they're eating food in the car on the way from soccer practice to the play date, and the unintended message is that time at home with family is the lowest priority at all. And yet we have good research, which I cite, showing that the more evening meals a child has at home with a parent, the better that child is doing, the less likely they are to be anxious or depressed, the more likely they are to have life satisfaction and pro-social behavior. And it's a very linear finding. If you look in the last 7 days, how many meals has this child had at home with a parent? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. You see a linear increase. The more meals they're having at home with a parent, the more likely that child is to have positive life satisfaction, pro-social behavior, the less likely they are to be anxious or depressed. And yet, what do we find with American parents? They're picking up their daughter from school and driving her to soccer practice and then to computer coding class. And I tell parents, cancel the play date. Make a family date instead. Prioritize the family. And parents will nod and say, oh yeah, we prioritize the family. They don't realize, no, you're not. If you're driving your child from soccer practice to a play date and you're eating in the car on the way from one to the other, you're not prioritizing the family. You're prioritizing interactions with same-age peers. And you don't want to do that. That parent-child relationship has to be a much higher priority than the relation with same-age peers. And again, I'm giving parents very concrete advice. When you plan a vacation, and you're going to go on a ski vacation with your 13-year-old daughter and your spouse, and your daughter asks, can I bring my best friend along? The answer is no. Because if she brings her best friend on the ski vacation, it's going to be her and her best friend going up on the chairlift. And all you've done is subsidize a very expensive play date. It needs to be you and your daughter on the chairlift. So when the chairlift stops and you're dangling 50 feet above the snow, that's a great time to have a conversation. That's the point of the vacation, is to strengthen the parent-child relationship. No best friends allowed on the vacation.
In so many ways, there are things as parents we can do to help navigate the education experience of our children, to help support healthy character development in decisions that we're making, establishing that lifeline between parent and child. I think all of those things are so important, particularly as we do face very addictive, very alluring alternatives in our children's lives that understandably they will be attracted to. I mean, that's how the business makes money, right? In music or gaming or what have you. There were other points that we didn't get to today, like the over-medication rates of boys in schools. I have a sense that some of those education changes that you talk about can help mediate that issue a little bit, and you talk about that in the book. We also didn't talk about plastics, and I think about how prevalent plastics are in our society, but when you break it down as these chemicals affecting boys more than girls, it's very alarming. So I really encourage our readers.
I'm going to take issue with you about affecting boys more than girls. The toxins, the environmental disruptors, the environmental endocrine disruptors in our environment affect girls and boys, but they affect them differently. The effect on girls is to accelerate the onset of puberty. More than half of American girls now begin the process of puberty prior to reaching their 10th birthday. And I present that data in my book, Girls on the Edge. And that's not good. The earlier, if a girl goes through puberty too early, she is at greatly increased risk of anxiety and depression in adolescence. And the rates of anxiety and depression for American girls have risen greatly. So girls are not the winners here. Girls today are much more likely to be anxious and depressed compared to girls 30 years ago. Boys are more likely to be disengaged. But that doesn't mean girls are the winners. Girls and boys are both suffering from a culture that doesn't understand that what a girl needs to become a woman is different from a boy needs to become a man. And the end result is we've got boys sitting in their bedrooms playing violent video games while the sister is sitting in her bedroom photoshopping her selfie for Instagram.
Well,
Both these kids are at risk.
we're going to have to wrap up here. But I want to say, when you talk about plastics affecting boys, you talk about it being correlated to them being overweight, inattentive, late to begin puberty versus the girls. And this is even plastics that are supposedly safe, like the BPA-free doesn't ensure safety anymore. So I really encourage our readers to check out that chapter. Thank you so much, Dr. Sacks, for being with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Today we've touched upon important issues vital to boys' development. There is a social justice component to these issues. For instance, people of faith are called to be advocates for the more vulnerable, who in this case are the boys developing under our watch. The fact that boys' character, success, and very bodies are at risk is no small concern. By educating ourselves on these issues, drawing support from like-minded communities, and having the courage to act, we as parents, school administrators, and concerned citizens can effect real change and safeguard those whom we hold dear. In this episode, Dr. Sacks addressed education in video games, and we touched upon medication rates and the overprevalence of plastics in our society. These are the first 4 factors that he addresses in his book. The 5th factor concerns boys' failure to launch later in life. Again, I invite you to see his book for more detail. I hope you have enjoyed this extended episode special of Chaos to Calm. Thank you again to Dr. Sacks. And until next time, may calm be with you.